Continuing our unit guide series, we've already talked about the Azurai and the Sturgians, but today we'll be discussing Khuzait, the dreaded horsemen of the Far East. Khuzait have a very interesting spread of units, and honestly, some of the best units in a lot of tiers and categories in the game. If this is your first unit guide video of mine, the objective of this video is to give you a loose understanding of each unit by tier, comparing it to all the other factions units in their respective tiers. I'll be ranking each tier or each unit as high, mid, or low. And if you'd like to catch the other unit guides, they're linked at the end of this video and you can dive in on my thoughts about Sturgia and the Azurai. But to quickly summarize what we're about to talk about, Khuzait reigns supreme as a cavalry powerhouse, but for different reasons than you might think. Their tier 2 and 3 units are absolutely outstanding, but tiers 4 and 5 start to rely heavily on the noble line to shore up some of the shortcomings of their horse archers. To put it bluntly, the Khuzait need a rebalance, but in a different direction than, say, the Azurai. Their units are so strong in so many categories that I think they need a few more glaring weaknesses in their army. But now that I've kind of summarized everything up and given you my thesis statement, I guess you could say, let's start in on Tier 2 to discuss the army of Khuzait. Here we are at Tier 2, and again, if this is your first time tuning in, we don't review Tier 1 because for the most part, they're all pretty much the same. Now, do keep in mind that with the most recent 1.4.3 update in the beta branch, we do get access to more equipment variety for the Tier 1 units, so that is worth noting. And again, I'm using the Equipment in Encyclopedia mod by Little Tantan. It allows us to get a little bit more granularity when it comes to taking a look at these units and comparing them one-to-one. Also, I have these awesome buttons here that I can press, like average of sets, because again, there are 3 different sets of armor or typically 3 sets of armor per unit, and each one with different armor loadouts. So by pressing an average, I get a really good way to compare every single unit. So taking a look here at our first one, the Khuzait Tribal Warrior, we get a really outstanding Tier 2, not just archer, but horse archer. And he is really like leaps and bounds above other Tier 2 archers. He's extremely versatile, right? He gets a polearm unit with a jagged spear, he gets an iron saber, and he gets a step bow. And the step bow is actually pretty damn good. So on top of it, he is pretty much all the things you would get for a normal archer, especially if you kind of take a look at some different varieties of them, but with the advantage of having polearm skill, which is pretty small at 20, a decent bow skill at 40, like any other Tier 2 archer. So he's extremely versatile, but he sacrifices a little bit of armor compared to other Tier 2 variants. So I would actually rate the Khuzait Tribal Warrior as a high rank because he just has so much application. He can threaten things as a horse archer, and so he's not going to be threatened back as easily. And on top of it, he does have the ability to defend himself in melee with his 40 one-handed and his iron saber, which has a good reach, which is going to really help him out in any kind of melee combat situation. Moving over to the other Tier 2 unit, we have the Khuzait Footman. Now, the Khuzait Footman is pretty interesting because he has a lot of the same shortcomings that the Azurai do. Not so awesome armor and a mace. Now, maces, typically the Eastern Light Mace here, are really good, especially against armor, right? You're going to smash through that armor and do a lot of damage. But the biggest issue with a mace versus, say, a sword is that when you're trying to stand toe-to-toe in a shield wall, which these guys have a wicker shield, which makes it very nice for a shield wall, they just don't have the best reach. So anything that's a matching shield wall or just a matching charging unit can actually get a little bit better of a reach on them and do a little bit more damage ahead of time, in my opinion. And on top of it, they can't threaten into any kind of cavalry as easily because of that mace. So if you're in Tier 2 and you just have these 2 units, you're going to be relying on your tribal warriors to do any kind of damage to cavalry of any sort. On top of it, like I said, they do have that terrible armor. The only thing really that the Khuzait Footman has going for it is its nice wicker shield. So while the Tribal Warrior has a high rank, the Footman has a low rank. But that's okay, because Tier 2 is just a stopgap for Tier 3, which is an absolute juggernaut for Khuzait. Starting strong out the gate for Tier 3, we have the Khuzait Raider. Now, what's interesting about the Tribal Warrior and the Raider is that there's no direct opposition for them as far as horse archers in Tier 2 or Tier 3. Khuzait is the only one that has access to them. The closest that you get with this is the Asarai noble line of the Ferris. The first step before the Ferris has access to a throwing weapon, and that's really the closest thing you can get in Tier 3. But the Khuzait Raider is extremely destructive. Not only because he is, of course, a horse archer and he's got some decent enough armor. You can see here 14, 15, 13, and 17, and his bow skills at 70 with 70 riding. All great things. But he has a heavy recurve bow. That is decimating at Tier 3. 62 damage coming out of this thing, so it's able to really dish a lot of damage down range, and he's got 2 full sets of step arrows, giving him a total of 48 shots. So the Raider is a very destructive force in the Tier 3 category, especially for Khuzait, who already get the advantage of having so many horse archers with Tribal Warriors, with Raiders, with their noble line, which we'll talk about at the end of this video. So I really think that ranking the Khuzait Raider as a high is cheating because A, there's no one else to oppose this rank, but B, they're so strong even compared to archers on foot, it's just not even fair. But moving over to the Khuzait Horsemen, we have another similar situation. As far as non-noble line, now again, when I'm saying noble line, I'm talking about any of the faction-specific separate lines from their footman or their recruit style unit tree. So for example, Cataphracts, Valandian Banner Knights, the Druznik, any of the other units that have their own singular line, which are more often than not some form of hybrid unit. Usually, not all the time, especially when you look at Imperial or Valandia. But with the Horsemen, again, you're getting a unit that has very little opposition. One of the only other Tier 3 cavalry units is a Mameluke Regular. And it's really just doesn't stack up as well. The Mameluke Regular here, it has 70 one-handed, 70 throwing, and 70 riding. But it doesn't have any actual javelins here to take advantage of, or else it would be in this little slot right here. So it really can't take advantage of its throwing skill, which is kind of miserable. But the Horseman here has same skills, 70, 70, and 70. But again, 40 polearm for the Mameluke Regular, to the 70 polearm of the Horsemen. On top of it, if you compare their armor values, if you take a look right here as I click over, you can see that the Mameluke Regular doesn't really have the armor that stands up compared to the Horseman. The Horseman gets a much better loadout. It gets this belted leather cuirass, which is just a lot better for them overall. It gets a weighted Eastern lance, Eastern spear, the round step shield, and then the Eastern straight saber. So the Horseman is a really good unit or horseman because there's, again, very little direct comparison that's non-noble line, and on top of it there's little variance from unit to unit. All 3 of the unit sets for the most part have the same thing, just a nicer helmet on one of them. And on top of it, again, great skills, 70 polearm versus that 40 polearm. So I would rate the Khuzait Horseman again as rank high. Now moving over to the Hunter, things get a little bit different here. It has, for its class, and I'm saying class as in strictly an archer, the best bow. The simple short bow is about anywhere from 8 to 12 more damage than any other archer in the Tier 3 category. In addition to that, the step arrows, it's got a nice amount of arrows here, only 24, that's its kind of downfall here. It doesn't have a double stack of arrows, but it has some of the best armor in its class as well. So already you get a really good bow, you get really good armor, you get the ability to at least do some decent damage at 70 one-handed skill and a nice iron saber. So the Khuzait Hunter, while it doesn't have the same bow as the Raider kind of wins out here with the heavy recurve, still gets a lot of really amazing benefits for being just a Tier 3 on-foot archer. Again, I have to rank this high. And I think you're going to see a pattern here as we jump into the Khuzait Spearman. Now the Khuzait Spearman, you can see right out the gate, has 33 body armor on average. Even if I take this average button off, it's the same body armor across all 3 sets. In fact, it's the second highest body armor next to Imperial, I believe. So already you can see that this character is got a lot of really amazing strengths in its armor. Has very low leg and arm armor, but it makes up for it by having outstanding head and body armor, in my opinion. And on top of it, it still retains that nice large wicker shield, so it can make a really decent shield wall. The only thing I think that's really just kind of lacking is, again, that weak leg armor. Everything else kind of has better leg armor, but overall worse body and head armor. So the Khuzait I also rank as high, especially when I compare it to other units in the tier 3 category. It just can't stand up as well. And I think this is the interesting thing about the Khuzait army. You want to have at least somewhat of a infantry presence, if you so wish. I mean, you can go purely cav, and as you can see, they're both very capable, even if you're not even dipping into the noble line, which we'll again go over later. They have so many great advantages in their cav units alone, with the Khuzait Raider having a heavy recurve bow, which outclasses every single archer on foot, even the Battanian Fiend line. There's no tier 3 bow that's as good as a heavy recurve bow, in my opinion. But I just really think that everything in the Khuzait line is at tier 3 is a high rank. And I think that really helps them out to have a lot of really good staying power into all portions of the game. That's why Khuzait threatens so well into other factions. Now, it is worth noting that when things go into the AI versus AI simulated battles, the only things it takes a look at is apparently its level. That was confirmed to me by my little Tantan. He was saying it doesn't matter about the unit type, what its equipment is, it just looks at the level. So I'm not really sure how these really weigh against each other, but it is worth noting that when it comes to the individual units. But now that we've talked about tier 3, which as you can see is a very strong point for Khuzait, let's jump into tier 4, where things get a little bit different now. Looking at tier 4, we get a bit of a gear shift. The Khuzait Horse Archer is not the apex predator that the Khuzait Raider is. Taking a look at the units and the I guess loadout that we've got going with the Khuzait Horse Archer, they take a huge step back. The Raider, remember, has a heavy recurve bow at 62 pierce damage with 91 accuracy and 76 missile speed. But the Horse Archer has 56 pierce damage on their simple short bow and 93 accuracy and 73 missile speed. So you're taking a step down in your bow here with the Khuzait Horse Archer. You do get better armor, which is nice. And I think really what you have to do though is compare the Khuzait Horse Archer to the only other true Horse Archer in class, which is the Asarai Mameluke Cav. Now, the Asarai Mameluke Cavalry is very strong. It retains that heavy recurve bow that the Raider has. The only thing that I would say that the Horse Archer has over the Mameluke Cav are the arrows. Now, for one, Mameluke Cavalry gets piercing arrows, some of the best arrows here, but it only gets one stack of them. It does also retain a slightly ridged Fleisa and a reinforced southern round shield and a very well armored horse, so he does have that going for him. But when we take a look at the Horse Archer, we get 2 stacks of step arrows, which are half the damage, but you get double the shots. So as far as the actual application of the Horse Archer, I guess you could say that it being a pure archer, it does have the ability to shoot more, but it doesn't do as much damage even if it has twice the shots. So that is definitely worth noting. So as a result, I give the Khuzait Horse Archer a mid rank, even though there's only really one other non-noble line opposition for him. So mid rank for the Horse Archer. Jumping into the Khuzait Lancer though, things again shift very heavily towards a high rank for them. They have some of the best armor. Now, I started to, in general, I don't compare any of the non-noble lines to the noble lines. But the Khuzait Lancer has such good armor that I was like, well, I kind of have to see how they do compare to the noble line. And they were outclassing Volandian noble line. So the Volandian Knight, I believe, is the tier 4. Let's take a look right here. The Volandian Knight is tier 4. He's got better armor than the Volandian Knight. In fact, almost everything is better on that Lancer than the Volandian Knight. The Volandian Knight does get the lance, and this guy gets a Khuzait Light Lance, so he does have the ability to couch his lance, which couchable is very good for a cavalry unit, obviously. But the big difference here is that this guy gets 100 polearm versus the Volandian Knight getting 110 polearm. So it's pretty spicy here when you see a non-noble line unit really perform the same, if not even slightly better than a noble line unit. And that's kind of shocking to me. In addition to that, you get a really nice, great, large shield from the Khuzait Lancer, so you can maintain that cavalry superiority. And I'm going to rank the Khuzait Lancer as a high rank. And I feel like that's a no-brainer here, right? If it can be compared to a noble line unit, it should already be just kind of included in that high rank category. So that's what the Khuzait Lancer has going for it. Moving over to the Archer, we have a lot of the same thing that we had with the Hunter. They get a heavy recurve bow, which some other archers do have. Actually, no, I'm sorry, they don't have. They do not have the heavy recurve bow. But they also get some step arrows, so they get some very nice arrows in this situation. Some other units, I believe the Asarai Archer has the piercing arrows at this level. No, barbed arrows, actually. And they actually have a simple short bow, so a little bit drop in quality there. So the Asarai Archer, different here than the Khuzait Archer, because the Khuzait Archer also gets a lot of really good armor. So really, one of the best things about the Khuzait Archer is they retain the Raiders' heavy recurve bow, so they've got that going for them. Step arrows at 2 stacks, so 48, or I'm sorry, 48 total shots. And they have a long saber. Now, the big sacrifice here is that their one-handed skill is at 90. The rest of the other archer line all have 100 one-handed. So they have a poor melee skill, but they make a trade-off here. 110 bow skill. This is 20 bow skill less than the Battanian noble line of archer. So I'm going to be rating the Khuzait Archer as a high rank. Again, they're just so strong. They bring a lot of really amazing bow skill to the table because that's the point of a archer on foot. Now, moving over to the Khuzait Spear Infantry, we get a little bit of a different story. Now, with the most recent patch, the Khuzait Spear Infantry now has a jagged throwing spear, much like the Legionary has a pilum that it can now throw. This is not the benefit that you would think. The throwable spear, while cool, does actually end up hindering the unit because it loses the spear. Once it throws it, it can't use it to threaten into cavalry as sufficiently as it could before. So the spear infantry loses its shield, which sucks. Its armor is not absolutely the best for tier 4. It's not terrible. It's not terrible. There are worse units, Battanians, but it's not the best. But they do have still that great shield that they keep over, the reinforced wicker shield, which is a better version than tiers 3 and 4. I'm sorry, 2 and 3. But overall, I think that by throwing that spear, you lose a whole facet of this unit. And if you look at its skills, it has 100 polearm skill. If it throws that spear with its 60 throwing, then it loses the ability to leverage its 100 polearm skill. So while I think it's a cool thing that it can throw its spear, I think it overall just diminishes the overall usefulness of the Khuzait Spear Infantry. So I'm going to be ranking them at mid, because they're basically chopping off a whole entire portion of their skill set at 100 by launching that spear into midair. So again, to recap here, we get a mid rank for the Horse Archer, a high rank for the Khuzait Lancer and Archer, as well as a mid rank for the Spear Infantry. Let's jump into rank 5 before then touching on the noble line for Khuzait. Rank 5 tells a very similar story that we got in rank 4 for Khuzait. Starting with the heavy Horse Archer, we get, again, a lot of the same traits from the Horse Archer. Comparing it to the Mameluke Heavy Cav, it does have a lot of really great things going for it. It has 2 stacks of step arrows. It gets a better bow at the step recurve bow, allowing it to do 62 damage. And it's got a nice fine steel saber, so a good amount of reach in case it does need to do any cavalry on cavalry or even cavalry on infantry combat because of the reach of that fine steel saber. It does also have a step warhorse, which I think is one of the best benefits of the heavy horse archer. So looking at its armor, it has a lot of really great armor. It's 30, 44, 34, 22. Really great set of defensive abilities on the heavy horse archer. But its bad bow, even though it gets high ammo, I think just gets outclassed yet again by the Asarai Mameluke Heavy Cav, which has a step warbow, which allows it to do 4 more piercing damage, higher accuracy, and a higher missile speed, as well as piercing arrows on these guys too. So they're getting double the damage from the arrows alone. On top of it, I think the one thing that the Mameluke Heavy Cav does not have over the Horse Archer is the horse. This is still an Asarai horse versus the heavy horse archer has a step war horse, which is just a much stockier, better, higher maneuverability, which you want with your horse archers compared to speed, than the Asarai horse. I will say though, comparing the heavy horse archer to the Bucellarii is just unfair. This guy has a step recurve bow, which is the same bow, but he has barbed arrows. His horse is an Imperial Charger, which is just dreadfully slow and miserably maneuverable. I think that the Mameluke Heavy Cav still reigns supreme, even though it got its bow recently changed. But the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer is that mid-rank for horse archers. And like I said earlier, this will get shored up with the Noble line for Khuzait. Now, jumping over to the Khuzait Heavy Lancer, it's just not fair. Looking at the Heavy Lancer, we see the similar narrative that we saw with the just normal Lancer. This guy has Noble line level gear. If I were to compare him to the Druznik, which I know I mispronounced, I apologize, it has almost the exact same stats. 42, 60, 52, 28 versus 40, 60, 36, 38. So the Druznik obviously has somewhat better armor. It has better skills. Its pole armor is at 150 and its riding and one-hander at 130, but it's not that far behind. 130, 130, and 150 riding, because these are the masters of cavalry here, right? So the Khuzait Heavy Lancer still has a lot of great things going for it. It has the best riding skill too, so even if I compare it to stuff like the Valandian Vanguard, which is a non-noble line heavy unit, right? So Valandian Vanguard. You can see the Valandian Vanguard has a lot of really great armor as well, but it doesn't have that 20 riding. And if you compare this, this is 26 horse speed to 5.2 maneuverability at 130 skill for the Vanguard. Compare that to the Heavy Lancer, it gets 4 more riding and 0.8 more horse maneuver, and its horse itself already has high maneuverability, good hit points, a good speed at 50, so the Khuzait Heavy Lancer brings so much power to the cavalry game for Khuzait. Top of it's got a great shield, it has a couchable Khuzait lance, and a fine steel saber, which has a great reach, so it can threaten again both into other cav and into infantry quite well. I think the only thing that the Heavy Lancer has as a detractor is its horse armor. The step half barding is the lowest horse armor of any tier 5 cavalry unit, as far as a pure cavalry unit in the game. Now moving over to the Khuzait Marksman, again, we're going to see, the Khuzait Heavy Lancer has a high rank. I don't know if that was that obvious, but it definitely has a high rank. So looking at the Khuzait Marksman though, we have an interesting story. It is really good armor, amazing armor actually. 30, 52, 36, 24, it is just all aces right there. Even taking a look at it compared to the Palatine Guard, which has probably the most armor of any archer unit, it still is just a shocking amount of armor, right? 30, 52, 36, 24 to 46, 54, 37, 35. This gentleman, though, has a step warbow at 66 damage and just bodkin arrows with a 3 damage. While this guy has a step recurve bow, so a worse bow at 62 damage, and then the step arrows yet again. So you see really good armor. But when you compare it to, and honestly, I think the Palatine is one of the best archers next to, of course, say, the Master Archer, which I think, for some reason, I feel like these guys fire a lot faster than other archers, and I don't know why that's the case. It might be because they have 160 bow skill, which helps out with their damage and accuracy, which the Palatine Guard have as well. Both have 160. But the Marksman has 130 bow skill. So it does lose out on some accuracy. It does lose out on some damage. It does have a nice amount of step arrows at 48 yet again. But I think it's low quality arrows, low quality bow, and I think the fact that it just has 130 bow compared to the other ones puts this at a mid rank. It does again have high armor, and it does again have comparable skills to the other things in its rank. And I think that high armor keeps it in there. It's also nice that it has low variance. All 3 are the exact same equipment index, which is really nice. So again, we're going to be looking at a mid rank for the Marksman. The Dark Hand, on the other hand, has had quite a few amount of changes. For one, its helmet changed around 1.4.1 or 1.4.2, I want to say. And in the 1.4.3 patch notes, it said it was given javelins, but that is not the case. All equipment indexes have no javelins, but it does have a throwable spear. So this is an interesting thing. The Dark Hand, in my opinion, used to be one of the best units in the game. I think across its armor, its really high quality javelins that it used to have. I'm sure that's a bug right now. So let's assume that it's a bug and the javelins are coming back. It will increase its rank, I think. But for right now, if this is as intended and the patch notes meant to say throwing spear and not javelin, then I think the fact that it not having a javelin kind of bumps it down, unfortunately. It does still have great armor, 45, 62, 49, 29. If we compare that to the Legionary, which I think we can all agree is just the Mac Daddy of defensive capabilities, 40, 62, 44, and 41. It still can't bring as much hurt to the battlefield as a Volandian Sergeant can, for example, who has a high variety of weapons to choose from, or any of the other Sturgian units that have a lot of very high damage output. I think the Khuzait Dark Hand does what it's supposed to do. Just simply hold the line. That's the point of this entire portion. You're not going to be winning infantry fights with Khuzait as well as you will Cav or horse archer fights. I think that's the point here. These guys aren't supposed to have the best infantry in the game. But with that being said, they still have great infantry. And the fact that they've got this throwable spear, I think does knock them down to a mid rank versus the high rank that they were before with their what's those things called? With their javelins. The throwable spear, like I said, it knocks out a whole portion of their gamut here. The 130 pole armor is not going to be usable if they throw that spear out. So that is unfortunate. So just by taking a look here at this army, you can see nothing is really low tiered except for the Khuzait footmen. But let's jump over here to the noble line before we summarize my thoughts overall on Khuzait and how they can really be changed in the future. Here we are, the noble line for Khuzait. Now, Khuzait's noble line is interesting. It's very similar to the Asarai. The Asarai's noble line is a hybrid. It's got cavalry elements, but it also has throwing / skirmisher cav elements, right? It's got a lot of javelins that it can launch from its back, but it has a polearm, a shield, and a weapon that it can use to stab things with. With Khuzait, you get a similar narrative, but this time it's horse archers and almost like a shock cav two-handed just destructive beast. So taking a look at the Khuzait nobles, I rank these guys as low. Even the other Khuzait units are just better than the noble's son. If I take a look over here at the tribal warrior, we're looking at a step bow, which is 46 pierce damage. And then if I go back to the noble's son, we're looking at a step bow as well, 46 damage. Step arrows, but then we get step arrows, iron saber, and a jagged spear. So we get a little bit more application out of the standard tribal warrior than we do just the noble son. But of course, that's not the point of the noble son. It's not to necessarily be this jack of all trades. It's just to get you to the Chanchli. I think that's how it's pronounced. I apologize if it is not. The Chanchli is got all the benefits of all of the goods from the tribal warrior, but it's now on rank 3. It gets better armor, it gets a nice weighted eastern spear, gets an iron saber, gets some step arrows, but it still has a simple short bow. So I would actually rank the Chanchli as a mid rank because I feel like the Raider still does more damage, and I feel like because his armor is relatively not that awesome at tier 3, he really can't do even a good job at lancing into things with his eastern spear. So he kind of falls at a weird spot in between both the Khuzait horseman and the Khuzait Raider, which we both ranked as high, remember? Those things were both very outstanding units. So when we take a look at that, it just kind of doesn't really fit too well. It's got a weird jack of all trades type thing going. But when we get to the Torgud, things take off. For one, it's the first rank that we get access to a glaive in the noble line for Khuzait. And honestly, that's so huge. The glaive has the capability to do an awesome amount of damage across the board. Like, it can just absolutely crush through things. It does now have access though to a heavy recurve bow. Now, if you remember the tier 4 for the Khuzait Horse Archer, they don't have access to the heavy recurve bow. Remember I was saying that after tier 4, or at tier 4 and onward, the noble line kind of shores up those gaps. Well, here it is. Torgut has got that really nice bow here. They do still just have step arrows, but they've got a great amount of armor here, and they can threaten very well with that glaive. They've got a nice step warhorse, so they're going to be going very fast, and then they've got the half barding, so at least that warhorse will be pretty well protected at tier 4. Now moving into tier 5, again, same story. Things just get better and better for Khuzait at this point. You get step arrows yet again, you get step warbow, which is better than the recurve bow by 4 damage, and you're getting a nice Eastern straight spear. You're getting, again, step warhorse, but you're getting step half barding as well, and just an overall better armor loadout for the Keshig. And the Keshig obviously is going to be ranked high, right? Because now that you're in tier 5, you're getting 160 bow. This is comparable to other rank 5 infantry bowmen. 130 riding, which is great, 130 polearm. One-handed isn't awesome at 50, but again, these guys are going to be able to just dish out so much damage with their polearm that the one-handed doesn't really matter as much. Now, the last unit here for the noble line of Khuzait is the Khan's Guard. And these guys have the old helmet, the spiked helmet with face mask that the Dark Hand once had, and they are so destructive. They have an amazing amount of armor. They have the same amount of armor as other comparative straight heavy cav units, but you also get the step recurve bow, which is again a step back from the Keshig. So it's a really interesting one right there, right? So Keshig over here, we get the step warbow. This jumps over to the step recurve bow. And the nice thing too about the noble lines in general, they have very little variance. So you're getting the same thing at every single unit. Then step arrows, same old as you would have expected. A glaive, an Eastern heavy mace, which is changed here in the most recent 1.4.3 patch. Before they did not have a mace, and in fact, I think Keshig just received a sword. It didn't have it before. So you're seeing that the Khan's Guard is really a two-handed shock unit, right? It can do so much damage with 220 polearm, 260 bow, and 200 riding. I honestly think the Khan's Guard, hands down, is one of the best units in the game right now. I think that the way that bow damage is kind of done, it's so devastating and strong, and then having the ability to just glaive things down is even more potent in my opinion. I really think that the Khan's Guard being a high rank is a no-brainer here, just because it's so versatile. And I think that's the biggest thing with all of the Khuzait infantry or military, is that it's very versatile. And having the ability to do having the Eastern heavy mace makes it a little bit harder to fight infantry, but then again, you've got the glaive. But if you get into a straight cavalry on cavalry fight, that Eastern heavy mace at tier 6 is going to be able to do a lot more damage to heavily armored units. Now, having talked about the noble line, we can now summarize really my thoughts on the Khuzait military. And I think that it's really interesting. We talked about the Asarai, we talked about the Stygians, and the Stygians have a lot of low-ranked units, a lot of units that are just absolutely garbage compared to other units in the game. And I think that there are some units in this roster that I had a hard time placing where they were. Like the Spearmen, I couldn't tell if they were going to be mid or high tier mid or high rank, because they did have some shortcomings that the other factions did have too, but the other faction shortcomings felt so much more glaring by comparison. Or the Archer here, the Khuzait Archer, I wasn't sure if that was going to stay as just simply high, because I felt like I had too many things in the high category at tier 4. So I think what's very interesting about the Khuzait is that they are so strong across the board. The only low rank unit in this army is the Khuzait Footmen, or if you want to even look at it, the Noble Son and the Noble Line. But that, again, that gets pushed away quickly. So with the Khuzait Footmen being the only real low-ranked unit, everything else you just can't go wrong with. The whole entire Horse Archer line, Raiders go with a high, then we go to a mid, and then the Horsemen, for the most part, are all entirely high rank. They're so strong, especially the Lancer and the Heavy Lancer, which I compared pretty openly to the Noble line, something that I haven't done before in other videos. Even looking at the Archers, they're stupid strong as well. So I think that rather than nerfing Khuzait, which I think is not fair. I think that just because a faction's really good, it doesn't mean you nerf it to oblivion. I think you need to raise the level of the other factions. I don't think that looking at the other factions they're weak because of some sort of weird innate ability that the factions have. When we looked at Aserai and Stergia and compare them to Khuzait, they just don't have the same level of equipment that transfers from tier to tier. Khuzait has a nice, great progression of weapons and armor as per their tier. Whereas almost every other faction, or the ones that we've talked about so far, don't have that. Like when we take a look at the, let's just look at the Stergian Hunter. The Stergian Hunter is such a good example because it's just miserable. I mean, the tier 3 Stergian Hunter compared to the Hunter here is just night and day difference. Like if we bring up this yet again, 14, 15, 13, 17. And if I go, well, I'm gonna have to type in Hunter again. It looks what it looks like. This is 13, 9, 10, 13. With a mountain hunting bow, barbed arrows, like it just, there's nothing that feels good about the Stergian Hunter. And it's the same thing with the Archer. The Archer gets barbed arrows yet again. Then if I go to the Veteran Bowman, barbed arrows yet again. So I don't think that Stergia needs this massive buff or Aserai needs this massive buff. I just think that they need to be rebalanced in line with stuff like Khuzait or the Empire. Things that are very well balanced and have a very nice curve of progressing tiered armor, weapons, and ammunition. I think that's the biggest thing that Khuzait has going for it. When we talk about Volandia and we talk about Empire next, I think you're going to see a lot of that progression of tier of gear, didn't mean to make that rhyme, throughout those armies. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video here today. I know it was a little long-winded in some locations, but I think that Khuzait does need a little bit of an understanding, because it's so easy to say, oh, just play Khuzait, it's the easy button. Yeah, it is the easy button, but not because they are an innately easy race to play. I think it's just because they're just well optimized, a lot like the Imperial Army is. The Imperial Army is very well optimized. I just think that taking that optimization and applying it to Stergia and to Aserai would make a video like this almost obsolete, because I would just be able to say, well, yeah, they all pretty much perform on the same level, but here's where this one thrives versus the other one. And that's because that's how their military thrives. And it's just not really the case overall with every faction right now. But go ahead and let me know in the comment section below what you feel about my review here of Khuzait. Do you feel like Khuzait needs to be nerfed? Do you feel like some of the other factions need to be brought up to par? Or do you feel like they should just have different buffs all the way around? I'd love to hear your opinion, guys, because I know that the developers, they do watch streams of other players, they gamers or YouTubers. They watch the videos, everything. So getting your opinion out there is the best way to influence a change in the early access of Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. But as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below. And if you do subscribe, please go ahead and hit that bell icon. That way you can find out when I'm doing more unit guides, game giveaways, streams, lore, anything that I think of doing. As always, though, have a good one and take care.